My question is, how worried are we
Yeah.
that we're not going to get Alex Ovechkin and Nicholas Backstrom back to how we know and love them?
Yeah. So a little relevant statistic that goes with your question. Alex Ovechkin was held off the score sheet. Like he didn't have a shot on goal in back-to-back games for the first time in his career last night.
I don't love that.
It feels like, and look, again, we're what, 4 games into the season, 2 games into the season for some teams. The schedule is just hilarious. We get to watch every single game at 7 p.m. on the dot, and some teams play all the time and others don't play at all. But yeah, that's a rough one. It's early. We don't want to overreact, but that stat with the way that the Caps have looked when we've watched them, it seems like could be a rough season for Washington. And I feel like we predicted this too. Like it's not a total shock that the team might not be very good.
Yeah, that's the
But
difference to me.
the Ovechkin thing is like we don't want to overreact, but also it's like, oh my.
Yeah.
On the one
Last
hand,
year
it's
we
actually
knew
kind of shocking that it hadn't happened this like that's kind of impressive that it took until he was 38 years old to not have shots on goal in back-to-back games. But then you're also kind of like, oh,
right. And we saw last year, Backstrom already looked like it was headed the wrong way, and we know where the team is at. I didn't think any of us expected the Capitals to really even threaten the playoffs this year. But you still, in your mind, are planning for 40 to 45 goals from Alex Ovechkin. And we may still get that. I'm not trying to overreact. A lot of times the stars do age in a way that like no one can even account for.
mm-hmm.
I'm just saying, you see an output like that. And maybe it's a start of the year thing. We know older guys start slow.
Yeah.
This is the first time I've even considered that we might not see the Ovi we're used to seeing.
Yeah. I think one thing, and I saw this on social from Tom Galitti from NHL.com. And to be fair, he went without a goal in his first 3 games for the second straight season. So this happened last year. You know, he went the first couple without scoring, and then we know what happened last year. He, hits a bunch of milestones, et cetera, et cetera. The longest he's gone without scoring his first goal was in 2012-13. He went the first 4 games without, and then he led the NHL in goals that season. Not saying he's going to win the Rocket this year. So a couple things to lower the alarm bells, lower the volume on the alarm bells. And he also had 4 shot attempts last night, but they were all blocked. 5 attempts versus the Flames on Monday, 3 blocked, 2 missed the net. So is it a shot selection thing? Is it a release thing? It's tough to know, but goal scorers are streaky. But I do wonder if the way that the Caps are constructed right now, if that's going to have an impact on Ovechkin's production. Sean, what do you think about the Caps? Is this going to be a bit of a rough year in Washington?
I don't want to overreact it right now, where this is like overreaction Thursday or whatever.
I know. We keep saying, I don't want to overreact, but, or it's early, but that's the episode title for Jeff.
But if this is the end or the beginning of the end for Alexander Ovechkin, like this is what it looks like. The difference between, I know we're talking about last year, he didn't score in his first few games, and he's had rough stretches in the past, typically because of coaching, whether it was Dale Hunter or playing right wing under Adam Oates and all that stuff. There are always underlying, circumstances or mitigating circumstances. Dude is 38 years old now.
Mm-hmm.
The end comes for everybody. It's going to happen at some point. At some point in the next 5 years, 5 months, 5 minutes, Alexander Ovechkin is not going to be an effective NHL player anymore. I don't think we're there yet, but we've seen it more than enough. And even if you limit the discussion to players in this all-time first ballot top 15, top 20, I go back to the NHL 100 list we did last year, the all whatever it was, the all-time list where Gretzky was number one. I always forget what to call it. If you just limit it to like the top 15, that list is dotted with guys who got old overnight. Mm-hmm. It happens. It happened to Joe Sakic. It happened to Steve Yzerman, who was, I know people love to talk about the mid-career pivot Yzerman made to being, a little bit more of a defensive-minded player, and he had a long tail at the end of it, but he was effective really up until the end. And same goes for Sakic. It was like one year he was, a 30-goal player, and then the next year he was old and hurt. And then there was a couple years in steep decline, and then he was done. And it's happened before.
Mm-hmm.
In the discussion around Alex Ovechkin for the last few years, increasingly so after last year, is that this guy is a power play creation. Like his play at 5-on-5 has slipped. There were signs of slippage on the power play last year. The main reason his production came was because he was force-fed shots from the point. And look, those all count. We always say it. I say it in discussions with Dom. We say it on the show. Power play goals count. It's a part of the game. But when it was such a huge part of his game over the last couple of years, and such a huge part of what made him effective and relevant, if that goes away, then we have a real problem. Like if the shot volume on the power play, which is the single biggest reason to believe that he was going to keep cruising for the Gretzky record, for the goals record, it was shot volume on the power play. And guess what's left in the last two games? Shot volume on the power play. If something happens, whenever something happens that knocks out that part of his game, it could get ugly. And if it's happening, whether it happens now, in a year, whenever, at some point it will. And it's going to look a lot like what we've seen the last couple nights.
Right. They're a really interesting team as a whole too with the Caps, because it seems like it's a team that, the kind of way that they were going at the deadline, I thought it was great. They kind of knew where they were at, and they just started selling off assets last year. And I thought that was smart, and it kind of turned into a bit of a quick retool, coaching change. They bring in Spencer Carberry, a couple tweaks on the roster. But at the end of the day, the roster in terms of like the core looks pretty much the same. Like we're still talking about Kuznetsov and Backstrom and Ovechkin and Tom Wilson. But then there's some TJ Oshie. We could go down the list, John Carlson. But there's some, window dressings that have changed, and there's some young players that are on this roster. Like shout out to Short King Matthew Phillips, who scores his first NHL goal against the Calgary Flames. So it's going to be interesting. They're a team that kind of is marked with a lot of ifs, right? It's like if Kuznetsov is going to have, a good season, if Ovechkin can score 35 again, if young players can take the next step, if Max Pacioretty can, be effective after his injuries last season. And then if all of those things happen, well, then, maybe they're going to be in the fight. Maybe they'll be in the middle of the pack. Maybe they'll be competitive. It's, 3 games in for them. They're 1-2-0 right now, and we haven't really seen that click yet. But, they're a team. I said this last year. I thought the Caps were like toast, and they had a pretty good run at one point, and then they ended up not being great by the deadline and started selling. So they're going to be an interesting team to kind of watch go up and down throughout the season.
Yeah, you can only delay that for so long, though, right? Like whether they're toast now or like Nicholas Backstrom when he came back from hip surgery last year, over the course of the last 30 or 35 games, whatever he played after, I don't have the exact number ahead of me. He scored less points per 60 at 5-on-5 than Lars Eller, and Lars Eller is like the platonic ideal of an all defense, no offense, bottom 6 guy. So if you're Nicholas Backstrom, you come back. If that's who he is moving forward, they're in deep trouble. And it's proof, again, like I keep coming back to this, where it's like this happens quickly. And when you have guys like Ovechkin or Crosby or Evgeny Malkin or whoever, you need to make hay while these guys are still good. And you cannot take for granted, because a guy was a point per game player at 36, that he's going to be the same guy at 37. This is how it happens.
Yeah. Let's end.
We can't let him age. I'll say this: we can't let him age out though until he gets the Gretzky record. So unfortunately, I don't think he's done. I still think he's going to score 40
he's had a
goals
slow
this
start.
year.
It's fine.
But
it's just like a fun stat to bring up. It's just like, oh, cool.
We might be having this discussion again in 3 years, right? Like I don't want to make it sound like it's happening right now, but when it comes, this is what it's going to look like. That's all I'm saying.